this is directed by Ishana Night Shyamalan, M Night Shyamalan's daughter. M Night Shyamalan produced it, and you said funded it as well.
Yeah, he
Okay.
financed it.
Financed it. So it's a family production. The
This
Shyamalans
is.
are the first family of horror. I'm rooting for it. I love it. I want to say, because you're the horror guru, so let me give you just a quick sort of surface reaction to this movie, and then you can tell us what the horror guru thinks. Here's what I think. I think The Watchers is not great. It's not a great movie. It's kind of a bad movie. It has a cool, creepy premise, but it ultimately does not stick the landing, and it has some sort of like bad CGI near the end of the movie that kind of takes the air out of the creepiness. But, and this is a big but, I had a totally enjoyable time at this movie, and it was a fun night at the theater. I loved the lack of like too much lore, minimal backstory, and then when you get the lore, you get it through like scrolls in a professor's office. Very fun. I loved a lot of those movie tropes. I loved stock elements like the professor and the university and my research and things like that aren't really sort of like, there's no need to elaborate on them. They're just movie tropes and they're fun. We were just sort of in the world of the movie immediately. It's a monster in the woods, scary. I loved the total lack of like meta horror shit. I love that we didn't get any sort of cabin in the woods stuff. This is just straight folk horror. And I liked how kind of low-key Dakota Fanning's performance was. It sort of made the movie just swim, that
She's
she wasn't
cool.
constantly
I've always loved her.
like
Still
freaking out and giving us sort of, sort of overdone. Like it was a very kind of like cool, low-key performance, and it just made the movie really move fast.
I agree.
My big take on The Watchers is I want more movies like this. I said it with Ministry of Ungentlemanly Warfare. I'll say it again. I wish there was still a place for mid-tier genre movies or even B horror movies in Hollywood, because I think this movie would have played a lot better if there was a space for those kind of movies. But there are such high stakes around every fucking movie that shows up in movie theaters now. If you have a movie that gets greenlit and it's going to go into movie theaters, there are such high stakes. It has to have fucking A24 level cinematography. It has to have all these avenues to IP expansion. It has to have a whole game plan and a business model. You're making a corporation. You're not making a movie. And it has to cost at least $30 million. Nobody's ever heard of a budget under $30 million anymore, except The Strangers Chapter 1 has, which was made for $8 million, and lo and behold, it's the highest grossing horror movie of the year. But let's talk more about The Watchers, because I really think that at the heart of The Watchers, there is just a fun, not great, mid-tier, even like B horror movie. That's what it felt like to me. And you would see it occasionally. You would see that, and that's when it would be the most fun and the most enjoyable. But you could also just feel you could just feel that the movie sort of unnecessarily had higher stakes than it needed to have. It looked a little glossier than it needed to. It did too much with the CGI, where it could have I think leaned on some more traditional like low budget horror effects. Like I loved the monsters when we just saw their shadows, and then when we like saw the whole full CGI thing, I was like, pass. Less is more. Less is more. So I think that I really wish that there was still a place for mid-tier genre movies in Hollywood, because I think The Watchers could have perfectly leaned into that kind of a movie. I wish that because I'm sure there's a lot of stakes on this for it being Ishana Night Shyamalan's first movie, but I wish that this movie could have been made for under $10 million, and you could have just churned and burned, and she could have been on to the next one, because this was a fun night at the movies. But I hate that it overall is gonna the theme is gonna be that it was a flop and that it was a failure, because it made $7 million first weekend off a $30 million budget. This movie should have cost under 10, and it should have been a little more fun and a little less precious. But I understand why it wasn't, because you really just can't make movies like that anymore, apparently. Also, the audience was a little unclear. I'm not entirely sure. It was kind of get stuck between a couple different things. But overall, again, I had fun. It's okay. It's okay to go to a movie that's just fine and you have fun. And then I went out into the lobby afterwards, and literally the first thing I ran into was a crowd of people, and they were like, one guy was like talking about how he saw the twist coming from a mile off, and the twist was so, I called the twist. I was like, this is great. Like a sort of like middle of the road horror movie that people are kind
let's
of
all talk about it
talking shit about in the lobby.
alley, yeah.
This is great. This
Love
is
it.
fun. It definitely did not like. There have been some movies this year that I didn't think were good, but they sort of like pissed me off in the ways that weren't good for various reasons.
Yeah.
This one did not. I enjoyed it while acknowledging that it was not great. That's The Watchers.
I a version of agree with you. I thought this movie was totally good. It had plenty of creepy bits. I liked a lot of the shots that Ishana kind of set up. It was very creepy. It had like nice scary moments. It wasn't interested in being the goriest or scariest or jump scariest or most shocking movie of the year. And it has nothing that we saw in like In a Violent Nature or in The First Omen. This is like cool movie that's creepy and scary.
It's almost like YA, you were saying.
I don't know if the book was YA necessarily. This is based on a book. But the movie had this little like YA feeling. Like there were like YA elements sort of in the story. And the bad guys or the monsters were fairies or fae. And that just sort of like reminds me of the young people like seem to enjoy that as the villain or whatever. Fairy world, like great, whatever. It's pretty good. It sucked, like Brett said, that they ended up just kind of looking like Demogorgon again, or like the Quiet Place guys again.
Save your CGI.
But up
it's
until
not
then,
working.
it was cool. It was atmospheric. It wasn't great, but I like Ishana. So she ran the second unit on Old, and she ran it on Knock on the Cabin Door, and then she either directed a bunch or worked a bunch on Silence, Shyamalan's Apple show. So this woman's like 24, 25 years old directing this movie. She's M. Night Shyamalan's daughter. So, that's the family business. Like, I respect the hell out of that. And she like got the reps in running those units. Let's say her dad trusted her with the $30 million budget to adapt this piece of IP into her first feature. And you know what I think it is? I think when we look back on her career, it's going to be like, oh yeah, her first movie was The Watchers. That was like pretty good. But then, then
I like this.
4 years later, she
like
did
this.
the third one.
It's
like she got out from a dad's shadow a smidge, but still retained all those amazing things that she learned under his tutelage.
I like this.
Because there's a lot of like Shyamalan through lines in The Watchers and in her father's work. Like, sorry to make the obvious comparison, but they are very working closely together, and you can tell because there's a lot of M. Night there, and there's a little bit of Ishana here and there, right? Like some of her interests and some of her ideas. But I can't wait to watch her next couple films. I bet by the time she's 32, she'll be like, top 10 horror directors. Like, we can't wait for another Ishana.
I like that.
I really do.
Because I will amend when I said I understand why she has aspirations beyond. Because this is clearly a movie that does not want to sort of like fall into a mid-tier movie or a B horror. Like, this movie clearly has aspirations. She wants to be the next M. Night or even beyond that. She probably wants to jump into the league of the Ari Asters and the
maybe she might just want to jump in the league. And this is like a workman-like family. Like, they're like going to work. They clock in, they clock out. They make great horror on a small scale. Like, I don't know where she's gonna go because I never met her. I don't know what she's all about.
This movie has aspirations, though. You can tell.
The Act 3 of this movie made me think like, oh, she wants a sequel.
Yeah.
Like, there was all of a sudden the lore started picking up in the third act. A lot of like, they're just fairies and this is how they act and this is what they do. And it was a lot of like, okay, all right, whatever.
Well, Act 1, which I thought was, like most bad horror movies still have a good Act 1.
I like Act 1.
Like Act 1 when they're building the premise is so fun because
it.
everything is just creepy and you don't know anything. There were some shots and sequences in Act 1 though where I was like, oh, I think she could be like the Sofia Coppola of the Shyamalan family, because there was like a lot of really good sort of atmospheric camera work. There was a lot of nice like kind of play with like soft focus and things like that.
Yeah.
And shallow focus. There was like a sort of to me there was more mood and atmosphere and less this sort of like propulsion and dialogue heavy stuff that you see in M. Night's movies. There was a more sort of there was something a little more atmospheric and patient about it, where I was like, oh, I wonder, like, maybe she's gonna be the Sofia Coppola of the Shyamalan clan, which would be a lot of fun.
Quiet, like dignified, like randomly and not specifically like a little gay. The movie was I get just like slapped of like, I had like little queer elements, and it was solid. I if you like horror, check it out.